Okay, so I'm back and I want to discuss legacy, the concept of how I see it, of sort of what it is that I do and why I do it. And of course, a legacy is um, simply something bequeathed by an ancestor or a predecessor, um, passed down. A lot of it was in legend or stories. And I was having a discussion with my son, Brody. He's 12, and we were discussing for one of his school projects the role of stories and what they're supposed to do, and they're supposed to be cautionary tales or whatever about life, and they would explain, like creation stories and stuff, tried to explain how things came about, but the stories themselves aren't meant to be um, explicitly descriptive. Like they're not supposed to exactly explain why that mountain came to be, or although that is what the story is about. It's a larger context that there's something greater that occurs beyond what we see or imagine, that for whatever reasons occur and create these things around us like trees and stuff. And it's to get you to think that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, we're not the center of the universe ourselves or this planet or the sun, but that there's a grander scale outside of ourselves. So in that I was looking at legacy and the concept of legacy as being, what it is we want to leave behind for future generations, which is partially why I put these together. One reason, the main reason being so that people who visit the website can understand a little bit of who I am and why I write what I write, the things that I create, the stories that I write, the limerick or lyric or whatever, and I actually have songs that I've written and stuff, and just sort of get a sense of who I am and who it is that is writing this stuff. And I'm sure some of the greats like Stephen King and those guys, had they written 20 years later, would have their own websites and their own YouTube channels and stuff. But seeing Stephen King on a YouTube channel on a regular basis would have been quite interesting. As you can tell, I see him as one of the better writers of my generation. But there are other ones, like other writers through history, Shakespeare and all that. And I'm imagining that they too would have, a YouTube channel or websites. So I take the advantage of being in this generation, at this end of this generation, and having the opportunity to create these websites and to create these videos for future generations as my legacy. So a lot of people want to leave legacies. A lot of people on YouTube do it so that they can not only inform the generation that we're in, but future generations as to, what comes about, both with the whole mask situation we just went through, because they've just eased up all the requirements here in Victoria, BC. And as you look around, half of the people, even though the mask restrictions have been lifted, half of the people are still wearing masks. And as a residue of the fear and the uncertainty that came with that whole year and a half or so of being, you know, locked down and locked in all these things that came up with screens and just the sheer insanity of it. And I kind of felt while going through it, as time wore on, 6, 9 months down the road, and we were getting, you know, masks that had like pictures on them and Christmas masks, and I thought, well, people are like in some way normalizing the insanity of it, right? So I felt distressed. I felt really uncomfortable about the fact that people were wearing these masks that had pictures of like, some guy had like a whole gnarly sawtooth mask with blood dripping and all these other masks. And I think I saw somebody with a tartan mask. So, I guess you could order a tartan mask to show your Scottish or your Irish kilt. And they were normalizing it, almost humanizing the situation, but trying in their own way to come to terms with the new reality. And I always felt that was really disappointing, because it's not something that should be normalized. It is, and it was a huge strain on society, mentally, emotionally, and financially. And because of that strain, hopefully our generation and the next generation and beyond don't see this occur for another 100 years or more. Although the odds are pretty good that it's going to happen again, and that perhaps people say, there is going to be, variants of this. So down the road, you'll be having like maybe every year you'll have a flu shot, and it'll be because of a Delta variant or all these other variants that we're seeing sort of coming up. And they'll test it and say, is it covered by the existing vaccinations? And if not, they'll create a variant vaccination for it. So it could be an annual thing. And if so, over time, they'll take the variant, but then, depending on the people and the length of this new reality, they'll probably just eventually stop taking the variants, and over time we get this herd immunity. But anyways, it's a legacy in itself. So legacies, the way I see them, when my wife, who's not with me anymore, before she passed away, she said, I wish I could leave a legacy. And I said, you are leaving a legacy. You're leaving me, and your memories are with me. And I actually have them on the website, and I have my children who carry on that, and her family and her friends, and there's a large legacy there. Me, because she didn't have children, my greatest legacy is my children, right? So thousands of years ago, when we're in the plains, and you look out and you go, we're not going to eat the rats we find in the cave. We're going to go out and get that saber-toothed tiger. And we're thinking, I don't really want to go out hunting a saber-toothed tiger, because that sucker's armed. But you have to say at one point, oh God, fine, grab a stick, let's go. And then, you grab a stick and a rock, and you go running out to your possible doom to get enough meat and nutrition for your family, so that you can leave a legacy, you can have generations beyond you. And in that sort of sense, and I know that was a little extreme, but in that sort of sense, I think that's exactly what I'm doing here. I've always wanted to create these stories and to show myself and the people I care about, a side of me that is creative, and for whatever reason. So I've been locked down, obviously, but I mean, I've been in the dark. I've gone dark for about 6 to 8 months now, because I had to finish creating 2 stories, and I'm working on a third, and I've got the bylines for 2 more stories. So, the creativity is still there. It's still fast and furious. But at the same time, I had to sort of duck out and just work and finish writing the stories that I have. So I've got 2 more that are going through editing, and they're going to be on the website. And then I've got one I'm working on right now. And I think the hardest part of the one I'm working on right now is that it deals with an experience in my life that was destroyed me. It tore me apart. And then, of course, when you have to face those things, you have to come to terms with the fact that, you know, your mortality has a large part to do with your sanity. You know, they say like genius and insanity are almost the same. There's a very fine line between genius and insanity. And you can see that with comedians. And I thought, well, that's an interesting kind of take on it. You know, skit writers and stuff like that. You can sort of see a mild bit of brazen insanity in there with this intelligence because they can stand outside and look in. And I think that was really kind of interesting, right? So having this whole concept of legacy where people want to leave legacies and markers on humanity, you know, on the zeitgeist of the ongoing society they're in, is sort of, I guess it's sort of being part of the discourse. So if I write a story that makes somebody think about, you know, like the story I wrote about the dead end and about afterlife and you know what it means to actually die, then there's a large part of that story where I could have wrote much more in depth the psychology about it, but I didn't. I just created a short story, which is what I do, right? So, anyways, going back on it, the legacy I think of generation is like you want to carry on and add to the discourse of the day. You want to add to the information that creates a generation, right? So in that sort of sense, that's sort of where I kind of go from it. Now there's like different types of legacy. There's you know, the change maker type of legacy where, you know, you have like protesters and rioters and martyrs and saints and sinners and all these people that make a huge effect on the ongoing society, for better or worse. And then you have those ones that are like, say, the poet or the prophet or the priest, and they are, you know, like the nurse. They're on par with, like, you know, they are. Some of them are the saints of the day, right? And they have a legacy themselves because they leave behind the legacy of the people that they contact and the effects and the residual change they make in the person that they've been in contact with. So basically, you say that you can look back and say, well, that doctor was really, really helpful. He helped me through this, or this nurse was really, really incredible. And then when you speak with people who are religious, they say, well, there was this priest who I used to go listen to all the time, and I don't know, they prayed or they played music and they spoke and they talked about good and evil, and they made a huge impact in their lives too. Does it make them better people? I don't know. Because the thing about legacy and the thing about, you know, the change makers of legacy is that of all the contacts that they have throughout their lives, most are good or bad, whatever, because there are some bad change makers. But generally, if they make that change in a person, then it can be generational. So that change is a positive change in a person, and now they make a positive change in somebody else, and they tell two friends, and so on and so on. So this thing sort of carries on, right? Now, it's supposed to add to the information of a generation. So if the legacy that I leave is my children, and I was lucky enough to have fallen in love with some beautiful women, and the children that we created, because I have like 8 kids, is that their lives now are part of that legacy, and they become the next generation in that legacy, and then they'll have kids, and their kids will have kids. So down the road, 4 or 5, 6 generations from now, you can look back, and my great 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 grandkids can look back and say, this was somebody in my past, a great 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 grandfather, and he wrote books, and he had a website, and he did these YouTube videos, and he had these discussions about the sign of his times, and whatever. We can look back at it and say, this is because of this person, this is sort of where I came from, this is sort of why I do this and why I do that, and why I cross my eyes when I write. I don't know, it's things like that, right? So the change makers, I think, that are more like the ones that want to make a change in the world, like the change makers, or say the scribe, right? The ones that write these things down, like the storytellers and comedians and critics and all those other people that, like YouTubers like me and stuff, who just want to document, say the sign of the times. Once again, that sort of legacy is part of what we go through now is supposed to be a legend on future society. So all the stories that we hear from, let's say, 2000 BC, 10,000 BC, these stories are just stories. They're carved in stone. They're told by the campfire, and you can't really discern, what point of that was truth and what was sort of embellishment. Now, having said that, there are the change agents or the legacy leavers who are, say, want to sort of change the narrative. So there's the ones that want to sort of work with the paradigms that we have now and challenge those. And when they do, let's say people like Milo Wolf, or let's say Walt Thornhill and Dave Talbot and all these other people who, Rupert Sheldrake and his morphic fields and all these other concepts that now make you question what we understand as fundamental in our lives, right? And they're challenging the paradigm of modern cosmology and what we understand to be, the truth of the most basic things in nature. So let's say the basic nature of the atom up to the basic nature of the cosmos. And these two change makers sort of, they have what drives them. And no different than the nurse, no different than the priest or the pauper or whatever, who make their change in different ways, but effectively to the same sense. There's the people that want to be heard. And it's a hard thing when I turn on the computer and I say, well, I want to make a video and have a quick discussion about, say, legacy, or about what it's like to exist in this time. And I kind of look at it like, if you fear the worst of all that's going to come out, and you look at it and go, well, I could have these conversations about legacy, or I could have these conversations about the paradigms, or I could have these conversations about all the things that are going wrong with the economy today, then I'm just one voice, right? And that's perfectly fine. But if my ancestors down the road look back and say, oh, this was his viewpoint, this was his takeaway, and be it right or be it wrong, there's a sense as to why he said these things, because of the environment that was around. So if I say, if I want to leave the legacy that, and I can't make the change today, but I can certainly leave the legacy to say something as simple as, yes, I understand the economy's in a bubble. I get it. Most people get it. Most people see it, but they don't know what to do about it. Well, I mean, the first thing you do is you stop buying a house for, a $200,000 house for $500,000. Just stop. Wait for the supply of houses to build, and then the house prices stay down normally. You don't want to get into a generational home where you get into a house and that's perfectly fine. The mortgage is fine. You have this home and it's for your family, but then your kids are going to still be paying it off. That's how long this mortgage is going to run for, because what happens is it creates a situation where most people can't get into the mortgage market anymore. And that's, good for one, but not good for all. Now, I could have that conversation and I could have that video about how that sort of financial situation comes about, and the effects long term. But as for legacy, what it's doing is it's creating a situation where the legacy of the time now is that in some point in the near future, there has to be a wall where they can't create any more money, because it's like pushing on a string. They say when you push on a string, it doesn't go anywhere. You push on a stick and it goes somewhere. I'm not sure if that's the other side of it. But anyways, the point was that the concept of getting into a mortgage at these low mortgage rates is a legacy, because it leaves the situation where the housing prices are so high that if the interest rates ever went up, nobody could afford it. And the ones that can afford are the millionaires, and all they're doing now is buying up all that real estate and making it rentals so that nobody can own in the future, because less and less people can manage to service those mortgages, those debts. But multiple investment groups and stuff like that, they're just waiting for this to pop so they can buy up everything. And what causes it? Well, the fact that the interest rates are really low and people are willing to spend $500,000 to $1 million for a single family home. They're not worth it, and the situation is going to end in tears, and that is the legacy. So I guess if I wanted to kind of make this video make any sense, everybody leaves a legacy. It's whether you think you affect other people or not is sort of not really the conversation. The conversation is actually that when you interact with somebody or when you don't interact with somebody, that leaves a legacy. That leaves a mark on somebody else's psyche. So somebody calls you up, says, you want to go for coffee, and you say, no, I'm feeling like I want to just stay at home, blah, blah, blah. That actually leaves an imprint on the other person. Well, no matter how you explain it, it's going to. You go out for a coffee with that person or go for a beer with that person, and that also leaves a legacy on that person and other people. So we're all leaving legacies. It's pursuing the things that drive you, pursuing those things that you find you're passionate about, that creates the legacy for you. I think the fact that when my kids ask me to go out to barbecue or to go out and do something and I'm there, cool. Very, very few times I tell them I won't or can't, and if I do, I just rebook it, because I know that the imprint of that legacy is, can be deep. I think also that the fact that if people understand that they're all creating legacies, then perhaps the decisions you make would be a little more thoughtful think through them a little bit better. I find that interactions that I have with people during the last 6 months especially have been a little more, shall I say, intense. People are tired. They're tired of the situation that's been going on. They're tired of all the noise that they hear. And I think what it is that the wall is coming fast. And I believe that regardless of what happens or what comes out of all of this, I think I'm massively impressed with society's ability to survive these sort of cataclysms. And this was a cataclysm. It was global. The next cataclysm is going to be monetary, and hopefully we'll survive that too. But I think a lot of it's going to be legacy. A lot of it is going to be how you affect other people and what you can do for yourself and for your family. That down the road, your generational great-great-grandkids are going to look back and say, oh, my great-great-grandparent did this and did that. And, you know, you hear a lot of financial people are becoming, you know, preppers. And a lot of preppers are you know, tooting their own horns saying, you know, this was coming, this was coming. Fine. And that's understandable, and I respect that. But there's a difference between informing people and just, you know, fanning flames and becoming part of that noise. And that legacy that you leave when you simply, you know, run around screaming fire is a different legacy you leave from the guy running around screaming, where's the fire extinguisher? Get me a bucket. Those sorts of things. Anyways, I think that I'm lucky enough to have left, or I'm leaving, a fairly substantial legacy of information to future generations. And I think that I think most people know that they leave an imprint on others when they interact and when they don't interact, at all times and all places. And you'll see that in some of my stories, like the bathtub story, and there's a few. The fact that you've made an impression or imprinted yourself into a generation, some people make a big deal of it, and they have YouTube channels dedicated to simply showcasing the person that they are or what they seem. And then there's people that have channels that entertain, just find humor the easiest release, and others warn of, you know, incoming disparity or inconsistencies, say, with science and money and all these other things. So, interesting time to be alive, I have to admit. A lot of things are coming up. I do make a prediction, though. I think that when the James Webb telescope finally gets projected, when it finally gets sent into space, and I think that they flap open those mirrors and start looking around, then modern cosmology is going to make some major changes in its descriptions of what's going on around us. Some people see a black hole, other people see a plasmoid. Go figure. Doesn't really matter, because I think the main point is that the more you learn, the stronger you become. And I think society's sort of headed that way. We're going to learn a lot more, and I hope we become a lot stronger. Anyway, so that was about it for this one. I think I'll be making another one probably today, and going forward probably every day or a few times a week now. In the editing stage, I don't need a lot of time, downtime.